Okay. Okay. So in terms of timekeeping, I will put my video off the moment you start speaking. When you see me pop up in the little box on the corner, then you know that I'm counting down to maybe 1 minute that you have. And then if I start waving you, or I don't think I have mute function, but definitely we could try and work around that. So just a bit of housekeeping. And will people be able to ask? I mean, of course, on Facebook and YouTube, we'll get the questions collated from Selvin.
Yes.
Correct. So what I'll do is I will collate them as we go along. Hopefully there are questions, but also improvise. If there's no questions, you could go through questions within the participants as well. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think just maybe to start it off, sometimes people get a bit, before they start, it's a bit more reserved. So maybe I just kind of highlight a few things that I may want to raise with a few of the speakers or ask them their opinion so we get the discussion going.
Okay, for those of you that have, we are actually live on Facebook at the moment. So welcome everybody. It's Sanusha, you can go ahead and welcome everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Lapsley is on. He's going to start with the prayer and few remarks.
Okay, so welcome everybody.
Everyone,
go ahead, Ella.
yeah, so everyone who is on screen has had some, have done work in Myanmar, including Reverend Lapsley.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not going to go into too much of the detail of the bio, so give speakers more time to be able to present their remarks. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Good day. My name is Sanusha Naidu. I'm based with the Institute for Global Dialogue, and we are very excited to be partnering and being part of this discussion with the Gandhi Trust and having the speakers on board. It's a, we've got two DIRCO colleagues here with us, and they would know that the Institute for Global Dialogue does a lot of work on South African foreign policy. And of course, Southeast Asia is a key area for us as well. So I want to thank Ella for reaching out to us and enabling us to be part of this discussion today. We have a very, very illustrious set of speakers that we have that are going to be presenting, I think, on what has been a intriguing several weeks in terms of the crisis that's unfolding in Myanmar now. And I think that what makes it very, very important for us to understand it is because it's happening in a context of an unprecedented global architecture in terms of where human rights, governance, and the rule of law is becoming an even more important space for us to be thinking about in terms of ensuring these rights and these kinds of institutions in terms of governance are upheld. So I want to start off now with Michael Lapsley, who will do a prayer for us, and he's been involved in work on Myanmar, I'll use that. And I think we'll give him the opening prayer, and then we'll take it from there.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight. Personally, I have had the privilege of visiting Myanmar several times and working with people of different ethnicities and religions. I have done this as part of the Institute for Healing of Memories in partnership with the Meta Development Foundation. I pray that tonight's webinar will deepen our own knowledge and commitment to act in solidarity with the people of Myanmar to end the coup and bring a new dawn of peace and justice as quickly as possible. Let us pray. Loving and compassionate God, you are the one who has many names. We know you to be our Creator, Redeemer, and Life-Giver. We come to you with sore hearts for the people of Myanmar. We know that the people have suffered for many decades under the heels of ruthless soldiers and because of armed conflict in many parts of Myanmar, which itself is fueled by injustice and exclusion and inequality. Every day we see on our televisions thousands upon thousands of citizens crying out for their rights and demanding an end of military rule. Thank you, God, for the spirit of nonviolent resistance we see on the streets. We grieve the death today of 20-year-old Mia Twate Kaing. We pray that her death may not be in vain. We pray that those responsible will be made to account. We rejoice in the signs of unity among the Burmese people. God of peace and justice, we ask for your blessing on all the peacemakers and opinion makers. We pray for an effective arms embargo against the Myanmar military. Even as we pray for the whole nation of Myanmar, we cannot forget the Rohingya people and the genocidal policies and the crimes against humanity committed by the Myanmar military. Please bless all people who live in IDP camps, as well as those living outside the country as refugees, and those who seek to work with them. Thank you, God, for a new and deeper sense of unity we are witnessing, and pray that it will become increasingly inclusive. Stir the hearts of ordinary soldiers to refuse to use their weapons against the people. Even as we pray for and demand their release, please protect and keep safe all those who are detained. Soften the hearts of the military leaders to turn from their evil ways. Hasten the end of all armed conflict in Myanmar and quickly bring negotiations and justice for all. We pray for the silencing of the guns of war and the dawning of the day to heal the wounds of history and build a new land. Be with the people of Myanmar in their fears and keep their hopes and dreams strong. May they know that people of goodwill across the world are wishing them well. We also ask that the leaders of the world act decisively, but with wisdom, to find ways to help bring an end to the coup, but support the people and not increase their suffering. Loving God, open our own hearts so that we may discover how we can act in solidarity and support of the people of Myanmar. All this we ask in the name of our compassionate God, who wills justice and peace for us and all of creation. Amen.
Thank you so much, Father, and I really appreciate that. So now we'll start with the first speaker, who's Mr. Michael Beer. He's the director of the Nonviolence International. Michael, you have 8 minutes to present your views around the context of the conflict and your insights around what's currently happening in the country now with this military coup and the situation. You can go ahead.
I want to thank the Gandhi Development Trust and the Institute for Global Dialogue for inviting me and us today to talk about what's going on in Myanmar and Burma, and to gather a wonderful group of people and experts to help us think about ways in which we can support the people of Myanmar to bring about a better future. It's a great honor to be here. I honestly don't feel like we have much more to say. Father Lapsley just gave just a heart-rendering, beautiful summary of the kinds of challenges and direction that we would love for the Myanmar people to grow in and to go in. And so I would just like to follow on with his remarks by just giving a very, very brief introduction for those who have been away from the news, that there was a coup in Myanmar, sometimes called Burma, on February 1, in which the military prevented the civilian government from being continuing on. They had won the elections, the National League for Democracy, in November with an overwhelming vote of 83% of the seats. And the military was very unhappy that the National League for Democracy, and specifically Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, was going to remain as the civilians in control. And so they did this coup. It's an anti-democratic coup. It's also a sexist coup, because these are all men who are very unhappy that a woman was the major political leader and is the major political leader supported by the people of this country. And so there's been a tremendous resistance on the part of the people of Burma. And around the world, it's been terrific to see the global community stand up in support of the Burmese people. The Burmese people have been doing all kinds of strikes to stop workage and to try to bring the government to a halt. The use of art has been extraordinary to express views in lots and lots of creative ways, whether it's shining lights on buildings at nighttime with images, or whether it's beautiful murals on bridges or on painting streets, or comics, singing, the great kind of cultural melange of Burma, Myanmar, with many different ethnic groups coming out with their own cultural traditions and speaking out all over the country. Massive street protests, which are very important because they show that the people of the country are not afraid. Lots of blockades around the country, blocking trains and cars in various situations. And we're seeing a nonviolent movement that is quite united across Myanmar. I saw a map today in which almost every township in Myanmar has protests today. It's just extraordinary reach of protests all over the country, in many, many rural areas in particular. And the role of many of us here, whether we're in South Africa, support and listen to what the Burmese and Myanmar people want. And Myanmar people are asking for our help. And here are things we can do that they're asking us to do. One is to stay informed. And you can stay informed on Twitter with the hashtag Civil Disobedience Movement, or What's Happening in Myanmar, or Justice for Myanmar. You can also find very good news at Frontier Myanmar, which is a really good news site currently, as long as the internet can stay open for them to get the news out. Frontier Myanmar. A second thing to do besides staying informed is to demand tough sanctions, as Father Lapsley said, on the Myanmar military. I will be posting links in the chat in a little while to help people go and find out more information about how to do that, to call on your governments to do tough sanctions and to engage in consumer boycotts, which can do that as well. We want to stop the flow of oil and gas money to the military, which is how they get a lot of their money. And I'll post more links for ways that people can do that. The regime, meaning the military regime, earns close to $1 billion a year from natural gas sales. We also want to end the military's trade in gems. The military in Burma acts a little bit like a mafia. They've captured many resource extraction industries that benefit themselves. And we want to tell the luxury jeweler Harry Winston, owned by Swatch, to stop selling jewelry with the Burmese genocide gems. Burma and Myanmar is well known for producing more than 90% of the world's rubies and jade. And finally, I would ask that people demand that Facebook ban the Myanmar military. Facebook is a major platform for communication in Burma and Myanmar, and we want the Facebook to withdraw support for this regime. I would just say finally also, in addition, you want to call on the South African government and other governments around the world not to recognize the ambassadors or the military coup that has taken place, and only recognize the civilian representatives, civilian ambassadors who've been appointed by the civilian government. So with that, I just want to remind everybody that in the modern world, we're going to solve our problems through nonviolence. We can't solve it through guns, through war. And when we have injustice in one part of the world, when we have COVID in one part of the world, when we have massive environmental degradation in one part of the world, it affects us all. And as we build this future together, let's unite. Let's support the Myanmar people. Let's listen to what they want. And I think together we can build a better Myanmar, and we can build a better world. Thank you again for joining us today. I look forward to hearing from all these marvelous speakers.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think you've really set the tone, and you've set an important structure for us to define this conversation and how we can go forward in the kinds of interventions we can use in terms of a global solidarity with the people in Myanmar, but also listening to what their voices want. And I think very importantly, raising the questions around how we can stay informed, but how we can also advocate and create action around this. And I think it'll be very important in the Q&A for our participants, our discussion, as well as those that are on YouTube and Facebook, to bring their questions forward. Just populate your questions in the chat box where on YouTube and Facebook. They will be collated and they will be relayed back to the participants, and we'll have a very interesting discussion. So next speaker is Ms. Mimi Kant. She's a MA student and currently studying for her Master's in International Policy and a Knight's Helvey Scholar at Stanford University. I think it's wonderful to have her. She's an advocate for the democratic cause in Myanmar as a student and a student leader before going to the US for her postgraduate studies, and she'll present the mobilization of the youth and the role of the opposition to the military coup. Mimi, you have 8 minutes to present your key points in terms of the presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for Gandhi. So my presentation is mainly surrounding the different aspect of what comprises the current movement. Michael has presented a lot of the things that I was going to say about the action points. So I will just talk about the different perspective and what is actually happening on the ground. As you may have already heard of, the main integral part of this movement is the civil disobedience movement. What it is that civil servants are working out of their jobs, just saying that we are not going to work under the military, under the illegitimate military government. So, and all the other movements are trying to support the civil disobedience to dismantle the military's bureaucracy as a whole. The civil disobedience movement was getting steam within the past few weeks. With a lot of people who are protesting on the street will go to different ministries that are not yet involved in civil disobedience movement to try to actually ask and request these workers who are still going to work to join with them. So that has been kind of something that has been happening in the past. So especially for Custom Department and Central Bank of Myanmar, that has not currently joined in to civil disobedience movement. People have focused a lot of attention on them. But recently, the military has started repressing a lot of these workers. So Myanmar railway workers is one of them. The military was actually cracking down and shooting Mandalay railways workers just the other day. And it has been happening to a lot of the other departments and department and ministry who are involved in civil disobedience. So currently, doctors and nurses are in hiding because doctors and nurses has been who are leading the civil disobedience movement have been sort of targeted by military for their roundup and arrest. Recently, some of the workers we saw couldn't stand the pressure and had to start going to work. So one of the example is the Myanmar Airlines worker. So they need a lot of support on the ground in order to actually keep the CDM going as powerful as it is. Michael has talked about demonstrations that are happening all over the countries, almost all the townships in Myanmar. There's almost the entire map is red. If you can see the infographic somewhere. So a lot of the places in the country are involved in street demonstrations, and they come in different forms. Rather than led by just one leader or a few leaders, they are led by their own communities, and everybody just coming out on the street in different places. And if the military has blocked one place, they will go somewhere else. And there are also really creative ways that people have shown their resistance. So dancing, music, art, poetry, and so recently, just the other day, there was a car breakdown movement. So all of the cars in Yangon decided to just break down in a synchronized way, so to block the police and just to show the resistance. Yesterday, we saw a video of cars just driving very, very slowly on the street of Yangon to show their protest while chanting sort of the resistance song. Those are the kind of the creative way we're seeing. Just yesterday, the new tactic was people were dropping onions and picking up onions on the street. So it's a legal way to protest, so the police can't really do anything. So those are kind of the major way. So and in the diaspora as well, there are also protests going around. So there are protests in front of UN Plaza, United Nations Squadron, in front of embassy, from across the country, and across the world in general, from Wellington to Tel Aviv to San Francisco and Washington D.C. and Kansas City. So those are kind of the diaspora movement that's been going around. There are also photo campaigns and things like that that are ongoing as well. I want to talk a little more about the arts. So the arts has been a very critical part of the campaign. People, a lot of the cartoonists, graphic designer have been putting out a lot of graphic in protection of to inform the protest, to kind of just summarize a lot of the atrocity that military is doing, to amplify the voices inside the country. And one of the really cool things that have come out of the movements is, for example, Myanmar poster campaign. They have been doing a lot of like war poster, World War II, World War I poster, and transform it into Myanmar Spring Revolution poster. So that's kind of one of the really creative things that people are doing. So violinist movement that came in terms of violinists playing in support of the country. So that has kind of the beautiful resistance that has come out on the ground, sort of just opposing with the military increasing their crackdowns on the different of the movement. So yeah. And that's my part of it.
Okay, are you done? Any other points you want to make? Maybe about something about the youth. How the youth are responding to this as well.
So I think for the youth, we have really come out and really united in a way. So different universities have involved in CDM movement. So it has really come to say is that for us, this is our generation spy. So we have experienced this window of a few years of just relative freedom, in a sense of we were able to pursue our dream. We were able to do things that we'd never imagined doing growing up under a military regime. For example, for me to actually come out and study at a university like Stanford wouldn't have been possible if the transition didn't happen in 2010. So then a lot of the youth, their aspiration has been there are a couple of things. So first, we think this is a different generation. We think this is that one time, if we are gonna win and prevail over the military regime, this is one generation that we can do it. So that's one of the high hope and really a strong belief that all of us has in unity, which is also really created all this creative and arts movement as well, because a lot of the young people are like, we don't need one leader, but because we are all leaders, and we're going to come out in so many different ways, in many creative forms, to show that we're going to resist until this military dictatorship, until our revolution prevails. So that's kind of the one thing. And the second thing that we have also been doing a lot of not just inside the internal pressure. So the things that Michael has said about pressure in the international community. So that has been sort of the in coordination between the youth inside the country, and then also around the international community, to figure out how to actually go about doing it. So that has another thing that has been our aspiration. And the third thing is, you see, so a lot of the unity that came forward. So there recently it was established was the general strike committee, with a lot of the ethnic groups coming together to actually consolidate our demands and coming in unity with a larger population of the country. So the young people has been at the very forefront of the the movement, and one of the things is that so kind of the common saying is that Gen Zs are at the forefront, and then Gen Ys are trying to do research and other things to help support, and then Gen X is also trying to support in other ways. And people have been saying is in the past it has been either you die or I die kind of revolution, but for this it's going to be you die for the military, because we are not going to let our people kind of have the bloodshed as it was before. So we're kind of trying to see how different creative way we can come up to support this movement. Another thing that really important that I wanted to make that I missed in terms of different aspect of the movement is the movement around superstitions as well. So you may have heard of the movement that has come up with the 8 p.m. banging up pots and pans. And that has largely continued. And there are other little movement that has kind of in support of it as well. And people have come out and come up with different sort of rituals to just try to show that they are in resistance of the military regime. And part of this is because the regime is military is known to be superstitious in the past as well. So that has one thing. And just the other day, there was a video that came out of this Chilean blood ritual against the military. So those are the kind of sort of a creative thing that has came up that has just kind of like led to superstition that's very unique.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the youth factor is very critical in this time of the military pushback against the military. But I think it's one way you can actually see some of the important gains that the youth don't want to negotiate around. And I think we'll come back to that in the Q&A. The next speaker is Kenneth Wong. He was part of the student uprising against the military in 1998. He's now migrated and lives in the US, and he'll speak around the activism with regard to this whole coup, but also I think just kind of contextualizing the activism that has been building up in terms of the military presence in the life of and the structural conditions of the country itself. Kenneth, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. I too join Michael and Mimi Khan in thanking the organizers of this event, the Gandhi Development Trust and the Institute for Global Dialogue that invited me to speak here. I appreciate the opportunity. One of the figures that re-emerged in this movement is the former student leader from the '88 movement, Minko Naing. Minko Naing recently wrote a poem. In Burmese, it means you can remove the engine of the train, but it won't stop the train, because now every train car is running on its own combustion engine. And that's a very good way to summarize what's happening right now, because in 1988, if you had arrested student leaders like Minko Nine, if you had detained a political figure like Aung San Suu Kyi, you pretty much disable the movement. But this is not happening with this movement. Aung San Suu Kyi and the president of the country and many of the leaders of NLD are now in have been detained. But after the detainment, actually the movement is growing much stronger. And you also see a lot of creative ways that Michael have talked about and Mimi Khan has talked about, the synchronized onion dropping in intersections and people slowly and leisurely taking their time to pick up these onions one by one to cause traffic jams. And the cars synchronize engine breakdown of the cars, forcing the police to come and physically push the cars out of the way, so that causing traffic jams. These traffic jams are not just symbolic resistance, they serve a much better practical purpose as well, because they actually stop the civil servants who are sitting on the fence still finding ways to go to work from not being able to get to their office because of these traffic jams. And the banging of the pots and pans at 8 o'clock, people have come to talk about is as the brass orchestra of the resistance of the Burmese movement. They may be symbolic and they may show the world that the people don't like the military regime, but they also serve a different practical purpose as well. When under the cover of the night, the police come to raid the homes to try to find leaders like Minko Nine, try to find the leaders of the civil disobedience movement, or try to find ministers who have shown public support for the movement. People actually bang their pots and pans so that the whole neighborhood will come up. And there were many instances where the police backed away because the number of the sheer force of the neighborhood that showed up simply outnumbered the half a dozen police officers who came to arrest the people that they want to target. Um, watching these events, watching these events unfolding from 8,000 miles away in high definition video streams and full colored photos, I feel inspired but also terrified, to be honest. Inspired because this massive protests, resistance have been going on since day one, since February 1st, the day of the coup. And it's showing no sign of losing energy. It has only grown bigger and bigger. The latest photos shows not clusters and groups, but a human tidal wave, uh, flowing through Yangon's downtown district, around Sule Pagoda, around Kledan district, and all those major areas. But terrified because, like UN Special Rapporteur Thomas Andrews, I too believe that there is potential for violence and it is very high. You might say violence has already occurred because every night under the cover of the darkness, police are raiding. And like the other speakers have spoken about, in Mandalay, the police actually shot rubber bullets into the railway employees' residence area and deployed tear gas. Um, in Naypyidaw, while there was a protest going on, a police sergeant aimed and fired at a bus stop, hitting a 20-year-old girl that Michael have talked about. And in the beginning, we prayed for a young 20-year-old student named Nyat Thwetwe Kaing. Nyat Thwetwe Kaing. The x-rays show that what went into her head was consistent with a live ammunition. So we're not talking about rubber bullets hitting her. And she was brain dead since that day that she was injured. And every night there are also, you might have also heard about the fact that the coup leaders recently, the interim administration pardoned about 30,000 or so ex-convicts and released them from the prisoner. These are actually part of the old script from 1988. It was the same method that was used in the 1988. Soon after the pardon, we see that many of the ex-convicts are showing up in neighborhoods, setting fires and trying to poison communal wells in these neighborhoods. The idea is that if if the communities became outraged and anger got the better of them and they somehow took the law into their own hand and say, execute or kill one of these people they caught in the neighborhood, then the army would have the perfect justification to use a heavy handed approach, including shooting into the crowd with live ammunition. Even when the protests remain largely peaceful, the police have used excessive force. In Myitkyina, for example, when the police tried to break up a protest in a school where all the teachers were gathered, there were reports that the police used force. They struck the protesters with batons, and in the process, they broke the arms of some of the teachers who were protesting. Um, in Mandalay, protesters have faced rubber bullets and tear gas. Um, the people on the ground, like Mimi Khan and Michael have pointed out, are not all NLD supporters. They are a mix of NLD supporters as well as NLD critics. Some of the student leaders who are leading the street protests are actually students who have a new generation of student union leaders who have in the past criticized NLD for not speaking up for the Reuters reporters who were persecuted, for having too cozy a relationship with the military. So we're talking about this incident unifying different forces, not just NLD, but people who are on either side of NLD, supporters as well as critics and allies as well as uh, rivals. For those people, for those of us who cannot join, it may be actually be the time to take a closer look at the Dirty Company list. The Dirty Company list was published by the UK Campaign for Burma, which lists all the corporate leaders and big names that have ties to the military's money-making machines. You might not know, for example, you may be an iPhone user, but you might not know, for example, that on Apple's App Store there is a app called MyTel. MyTel is actually a telecommunication company that is run by the military. So if you're an iPhone user, maybe you might want to think about writing to Tim Cook and saying, I really don't appreciate having MyTel on the App Store. You should remove it. You might not know that India-based Infosys, IT and software supplier, also supply IT systems to Myawaddy Bank, the bank that is run by the military. Since the beginning, people have been very leery of how China is going to react because the 800-pound gorilla in Asia has a lot of muscles to move Burma's policy one way or the other. The Burmese people have realized that the UN Security Council statement that came out were somewhat watered down. It says that the council is concerned about the emergency situation, but it came up short of condemning the military coup. And people realized that was because China's resistance and Russia's resistance. Ever since then, the anger that has been boiling is now actually spilling over because the demonstrations in front of the Chinese embassy is growing larger and larger. And lately, China seems to be changing its tune because the ambassador to China, Burmese ambassador to China, has come out publicly calling for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi. So that's a very good sign that things are starting to change. This Sunday, there will be a funeral for the young lady, the 20-year-old young lady, Myatwatha Kaing, who passed away because her family has decided to remove the life support system from her. I think of many Myatwatha Kaing who are on the ground protesting, and I think of the rifles that are leveled at them. I'm inspired by their courage, but I'm also terrified to imagine what's coming. I know and I believe that in the end, democracy will come to Burma, but at what cost is the question that I dare not answer. Thank you. I'll take more questions in the discussion phase.
Thank you very much, Mike, Ken, for that very, very sobering analysis of what's going on in Burma, as well as in the context of the activism. I think your paradox of being inspired and terrified is one that I think will resonate with most people in terms of what's going to be the outcome. Let me now turn to Reverend Suguno who is the Deputy Secretary General, Religion for Peace, who has worked a lot in Burma and Myanmar around the role of religion, the peace, bringing an end to the atrocities. I think you have a presentation that you may want to share. I think you may have you can share your screen.
Thank you so much.
Reverend?
Let
Yes.
me try. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, Honorable Ella Gandhi and the distinguished panelists, my religious of peace colleagues, friends, and partners, thank you for giving me an opportunity to share religious of peace work in Myanmar and our perspective on the unfolding events in the country. Perhaps many of you, many of us who love the country and its people are in deep self-reflection and self-introspection. Why we have not able to prevent this military coup from happening. At the same time, the courage and the resilience of the people of Myanmar, demonstrated by the civil disobedience movement, are the results of their intensive efforts, particularly in the last 10 years, of trying to cultivate the vision of more inclusive, multi-religious, multi-ethnic societies in Myanmar. Allow me to focus on, in my short presentation, on what Tatmadaw, the military, intended and not intended, and unintended consequences of the coup, share what channels of communications and the spaces of dialogue Religions of Peace has built over the years, touch on possible scenarios of supporting the will of the people while not losing the key channels of communication with all stakeholders, including the military. Let me begin with an interesting set of pictures in which Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing visited mosques, churches, and temples. You can see Senior General visiting Muslim mosques, Hindu temples, and speaking with Cardinal Charles Bo of Catholic Church. When Pope Francis visited Myanmar in 2019, the Cardinal Bo arranged a private meeting between Pope Francis and Senior General. These pictures show Senior General's political ambition, of course, and religious leaders' need to navigate the delicate balance between the military and the civilian government. The power of Tatmadaw under the civilian military hybrid system of governance, we can recall all the privileges and powers already discussed by previous speakers. That, of course, Tatmadaw has a tremendous power. In fact, in the last 50 years, nearly 50 years, Myanmar has been under military regime. So they have economic, political power, parliamentary quota, and all those privileges, economic, political, social privileges, and presence in the country, dominant presence. But one thing the current civilian military hybrid system of governance does not offer, is the presidency. So though Aung San Suu Kyi, as a de facto civilian head of government, controls the selection of president, as you recall. So the military can have the vice president, one of the vice presidents, but not the president. And that's what Senior General Min Aung Hlaing was aspiring to become. And the Tatmadaw, the intention of organizing this coup let us examine one more time. They thought about very quick, swift coup, non-violent takeover, and govern the country. They thought they can govern the country better than the NLD. So that was very clear from their intention. They thought they have experience and the capabilities to govern the country better than the NLD. And for instance, from their statements, they can invite more foreign investment and improve the economy, and responding effectively to the COVID-19 using the government, the military infrastructure and experience. And also peace processes. NLD didn't succeed, and military and the senior general was confident he can make the difference. And also, even, of course, that the military has to be blamed for the Rohingya refugees, but they said in their statement that they can repatriate some of the refugees from Bangladesh. So all these things, they thought, the Tatmadaw military thought, the NLD government led by Aung San Suu Kyi was not doing, not delivering. So that's a very important intention behind this coup. And also the unintended consequences we all discussed today. Huge civil disobedience movement across the nation. Governmental functions stopped almost. Banking system, private sector, power generation sectors all disrupted. And anti-military sentiments were growing. As you saw in the picture of Min Aung Hlaing meeting with religious leaders, and he wanted to become the president of the people. And but this totally unintended consequences that military is totally rejected by the people of Myanmar. So that was not intended by the military. And Religions of Peace joined many other civil society groups, yourself, and all the local NGOs and other partners to advance a multi-religious vision of peace and the inclusive nation building in Myanmar in the last 10 years. We have joined forces to build the more inclusive societies in Myanmar, as you recall. And we built Religions of Peace Myanmar, and the bringing together Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Hindu communities all together in solidarity with their fellow brothers and sisters from same faith in Asia and beyond, and in partnership with different governments. So that was the effort we made in Myanmar. And of course, we have to enter into the diplomatic initiatives. We had the private discussions with the State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi herself, and also the about 20 governments stationed in Myanmar. Good balance between Asian governments and also European governments, and negotiating to create the space for dialogue, an open space for dialogue. And you can see our Honorable Ella Gandhi, our Religions of Peace honorary president, was with us a couple of times in Myanmar to advance that work. Finally, those efforts culminated in the Religions of Peace Advisory Forum on Peace and Reconciliation. You can see from that picture, we had the Senior General Aung San Suu Kyi and representatives from the armed organizations, ethnic armed organizations, the civil society groups as well, parliamentarians, and the diplomats all together. The intention was to create the safe and open space for dialogue, to discuss countries' challenging situation, And you can see in this picture, in fact, we had discussion among different stakeholders. The military controls 3 security-related ministries, as you know, and representatives from those 3 ministries, together with Rohingya representatives in the meeting. So it was, of course, closed meeting, but it was important for us through the multi-religious collaboration to offer that space for dialogue. So just to conclude my short presentation, there are different scenarios you can think about. Number 1, military coup succeeds and the country returns to the military rule. That's one option, scenario. Number 2, military fails and completely relinquishes its power. That's possible. And 3, neither the coup nor the CDM succeeds, and the country faces greater political, economic, societal turmoil, intensifies civil wars, and becomes totally ungovernable. So that's quite likely. And number 4, which is Religions of Peace in our organization, and also many people in this event, hope. Military is positioned in its proper and dignified place in the country, and the path for multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and inclusive nation building is resumed. So we have to think about the military can take proper place. They can't enter, they don't have to enter into the political space, but they have their own job. So how to give them the proper place. And then we started 10 years ago, this path for multi-religious, multi-ethnic, inclusive nation building. And that should continue. And we have Religions of Peace has a unique channels of communication with the Aung San Suu Kyi side, not now, but with Senior General, we had in Nepido, you have civilian government section and the military section, totally different. And we had a shuttle diplomacy, multi-religious diplomacy between those 2 parties. And this is the dream and hope we have. Religions of Peace, Myanmar sent the delegation to Germany in 2019. You can see Rohingya representative, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, and all ethnic groups got together and even invited religious leaders from Bangladesh to work together for peace and reconciliation. And that path has not failed. The evidence is civil disobedience movement, what's happening now. So I think 10 years is not a useless effort for us, but we have to build on it. And every organization, every individual has responsibility here, and the Religions of Peace will continue with humility and modesty and respect for the will of the people. We will continue our effort as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Reverend. I think that was a very good follow-up from Kenneth's presentation as well, just presenting us with particular scenarios of where we see all of this going in terms of the military, the governance structure, and the kind of inclusive nation building approach that has a multi-faith, a multi-religious approach. And I think it's very important that we keep these in mind, because we need to look at what happens after, what goes on in terms of, what's the sustainability of this resistance against the military, against the coup, and how does it go forward in terms of momentum, where we can have at least less of the kinds of interventions that we see from the military with the kinds of attacks that are taking place. Our next speaker is Anil Sukla, who is the Deputy Director General for Asia and Middle East at our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, called Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Anil is well known to all of us, I think, in South Africa as well as in international circles. You know, he's the Sherpa for BRICS. He's also, I think, at some point he's had a lot of work on IPSA, and I think he's going to give us a perspective on the role that South Africa can play in terms of the advocacy, the lobby as an international actor in the global system, but also in terms of the kinds of civil society support that can happen. Anil, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Sanusha, and good evening to all the fellow eminent panelists, and my gratitude to Ila Gandhi and the Gandhi Development Trust for inviting us to share perspectives of the government position on the situation in Myanmar. And also thank you for arranging this very important webinar focusing on the unfortunate developments in Myanmar. On the 1st of February, following the military takeover of government in Myanmar, the South African government issued a statement wherein we expressed serious concern with the developments in Myanmar and called for the immediate release of all those that were detained, as well as calling on the military to respect the rule of law. We also called on all parties to enter into dialogue to try and resolve political differences. And in that statement, South Africa also pledged to continue to support the people of Myanmar in the pursuit of democracy, peace, human rights, and the rule of law. Now, the history of South Africa and Myanmar, or Burma as it was called then, we have a strong historical relationship. Burma was one of the 5 co-sponsors of the first Solidarity Summit between Africa and Asia, the so-called Bandung Meeting of 1955. During the dark days of our struggle against apartheid, South Africa was invited through the ruling party, the African National Congress, to that very important conference that provided us a platform to champion the cause of South Africa's democratic struggle. So you can see that Burma stood with us in our hour of need. And when we became a democracy, we had a moral responsibility to also support the people of Burma in their quest for democracy and the rule of law. So from the very early period, under the presidency of Nelson Mandela, continued under the presidency of Thabo Mbeki, and throughout, we have had direct engagement through government and through civil society structures with the people of Myanmar, trying to assist them in their return to the rule of law, democracy, and ensuring that the fundamental freedoms and rights of the individuals were respected. Now, through our embassy in Thailand, which is accredited to Myanmar on non-residential basis, our ambassadors have over the years constantly engaged with the leadership in Myanmar to try and assist them. We have had delegations going to Myanmar to share our own experiences at reconciliation and nation building, our experience at constitution making. When Burma was crafting its new constitution in 2008, we also sent our experts to assist them, and we had delegation coming to South Africa to also learn from our experience. As recently as 2018, we had the South African constitution translated into the Burmese language to assist the people of Myanmar in the constitutional reform process that was being spoken of. So we also had a number of initiatives from civil society, the In Transition Initiative. I'm sure Deputy Minister Ibrahim will speak about those initiatives where they were involved in trying to assist the Burmese people in terms of the return to democracy and good governance. Now, of course, for South Africa, democracy, good governance, and the rule of law and the fundamental freedoms, fundamental principles of our foreign policy. So wherever you have a transgression of these fundamental rights that are also contained in the United Nations Charter, the African Union Constitutive Act, and the SADC Treaty, all of which inform South Africa's position. South Africa naturally speaks out against such instances. So, as I've indicated, in the case of Myanmar, we immediately released a statement and we remained seized with the situation. I had the opportunity to brief our portfolio committee on international relations last week on the situation in Myanmar. Today, we briefed our principals, our minister and deputy minister, on an update on the situation in Myanmar, because Myanmar has a high profile in South African society, as I've indicated, not just for the historical relationship that we share, but our common desire to see the rule of law prevailing and the return of democracy and fundamental freedoms of the people of Myanmar. We also called in the ambassador of Myanmar here in Pretoria and expressed our deep concern with developments there and the desire of the South African government to see a return to the rule of law. I've also had interaction with nearly all of the ambassadors of ASEAN. We have 7 African ASEAN countries that have embassies in Pretoria, and I have had interaction with them. You probably also know that in November last year, South Africa became a party to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. That is the treaty that brings us into an association with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So we have a formal relationship with ASEAN as of November last year, and the developments in ASEAN, in Myanmar, of course, is of concern to us. We are supporting the initiatives of the United Nations Secretary General, where he has deployed a special envoy in the form of Christine Burgener to interact with Myanmar, and we are hoping that the request for the special envoy to be allowed to travel to Myanmar to interact with all the parties and get a first-hand reading of the situation would be successful. We support this initiative. And I think, as Secretary General Antonio Guterres has pointed out, the development in Myanmar is a major setback to the democratic reforms, and we feel so exactly the same. We were very encouraged with the 2015 elections and the elections that took place on the 8th of November. We were encouraged that democracy was finally entrenching itself in Myanmar. And we are deeply concerned with the military coming to power, and we firmly believe that there must be a rule to civilian, back to civilian rule and respecting the rule of law and the will of the people. By and large, we were happy that ASEAN pronounced favorably on the outcomes of the election as being fair, free, credible, and respecting the will of the people. And I think that must be respected. And South Africa stands ready to continue to work with our ASEAN, seeing a return to normalcy in that country and seeing a return to the rule of law and the fundamental freedoms and rights of the individuals being respected. We are watching and, of course, following closely the civil disobedience movement there, and we call on the military not to use force, but to respect the fundamental rights of the individuals and of all of the people of Myanmar going forward. So South Africa remains deeply concerned, and we stand ready to assist in whatever small way we can to see Myanmar return to a state of normalcy and the rule of law. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. I think this is very important for us to understand the role that South Africa has historically, but also the role South Africa has played in terms of the rule of law, governance, and democratic dispensation. And I think it's important that we understand also that South Africa is watching the issue very carefully and we're willing to assist where possible. Our final speaker tonight is Sanusha Naidu, the founder of the Free Burma campaign or movement. He's not with us tonight, but he sent a video speech, which I think we'll play now. And thereafter, we will open up for questions and discussion with the panelists. So I'm going to hand over back to the organizers to allow to play Kiru's video.
Greetings, friends. The rapid leak in Burma is a matter of considerable distress. And at this time, it's important that the international community, particularly at the level of civil society, is able to mobilize in support of the democratic forces in that country. Now, military rule is not something unfamiliar to Burma. Going back to 1962, General Ne Win seized power in a military coup and remained in power right up until 1990 with the elections there, a disputed election in which the military refused to hand over power. In spite of all of this, Aung San Suu Kyi and the democratic forces in Burma have consistently mobilized to restore democracy in that country. A great deal of what they were able to achieve after the 1990 election was in small part due to the solidarity that they were able to mobilize in the international community. In South Africa, close on 30 years ago, we were able to join this international solidarity by the formation of the Free Burma Campaign South Africa. And we were very pleased at the time to be able to have eminent peacemakers like Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, who was able to be a patron of our movement. And we were able to gather tremendous forces right across the spectrum, right across the political spectrum, but most notably in COSATU and the South African Communist Party. The African National Congress also was able to issue statements in support of democracy and the mobilization of forces like the National League for Democracy. So as South Africa, that had been recently freed from the oppression of apartheid in the early 1990s, we then took the posture that as recently liberated South Africans, we had an interest in campaigning for the freedom of people elsewhere in the world. That posture must be something that we rekindle today as Burma faces probably the most difficult chapter in its transition to democracy. We speak about transitions and looking particularly at the Latin American cases where we had dictatorships in countries like Chile and Argentina. The literature there talks about a transition from dictatorship to some kind of democratic alternative, and that's been very well studied. But they also make a point of the threat of authoritarian regression, and that's what we have seen in Burma now, that a government elected by the people has been subverted through authoritarian regression by the military. It's vitally important that we use all the forces available at our disposal in civil society and all the mechanisms through Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other bodies to put pressure on the military to give up power and hand back the authority for governance in that country to the legitimate authorities. I think it's vitally important also that we are guided by the democratic forces in Burma itself. And even though it's a very oppressive environment with limited access to communication, we are able to receive and send messages to activists there. So I think it's key that as we gather in this important webinar, that we maintain pressure on all fronts, maintain pressure on our government and our civil society movements for everybody to speak up in solidarity with Burma. And I think now, at this particular moment where we convene this gathering, we ought to come away with a series of resolutions to express in meaningful ways our solidarity. If we allow the military in Burma to entrench itself once again, the prospect of civil and political unrest and considerable instability in that country is quite great. There's also the very real risk of the country breaking up because of its multi-ethnic nature. We cannot, in this day in the 21st century, confronted as we are by the pandemic and other challenges that face our world, to allow this kind of adventurism on the part of an undisciplined military that has to be called to order and democracy restored in that country. I would like to propose that arising out of this webinar, we have a declaration from South Africa that says that we are committed to the restoration of democracy in Burma. We are committed to support for the democratic forces and in particular the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi, and that we are committed also to promoting every platform that will lead to a peaceful and prosperous future for Burma. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiru. And I think that was quite an interesting way to round off this presentation by proposing a declaration which gives us a sense of working towards a way forward here in context of a global solidarity campaign that builds on the issues that we've been discussing in terms of the support to the people in Burma, but also to the democratic norms and values, the rule of law, the rights, the human rights questions, and people's ability to be able to vote freely and accept the outcome of the election in a free and fair way. We don't have too many questions. We have one question, or we have about 3 questions, but I want to get to them first. We have just a little bit under 25 minutes to have the Q&A. I don't know if any of the presenters want to have raise questions with each other or raise points of clarification or discussion, but there's a question here from one of our participants on either Facebook or YouTube, and the participant is asking what the left from South Africa can do to support the people of Myanmar, and whether this is something that could be mobilized and galvanized in a way to go forward. And I think it would be interesting in terms of looking at, what the role of this, what the role of different South African campaigns, interest groups in the country can do in terms of the level of support, besides just the campaigning, besides just the being informed or staying informed. And I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here and ask Anil and as well as the former Foreign Minister Ibrahim to give us a sense of the role that South Africa plays in this kind of advocacy to support advocacy groups in South Africa, but also in terms of the BRIC civil society and how those things have come about and how these can be possible avenues that could be explored with regard to the kind of international partnership and the role that South Africa is playing at an international level, but also the kind of domestic constituency that could be important for South Africa to also support. I'm not sure.
I think maybe DM Ibrahim would want to go first. I could go first, no problem. Well, let me say that Myanmar needs assistance from all sectors of society. Government has to play its role, and I think I've outlined the role that we are trying to play and will continue to remain seized with this matter and try to assist in whatever way we can to take the process forward. I must say, we're encouraged by what is happening within ASEAN. ASEAN was previously not very forthcoming in these kind of situations based on the difficulties they themselves have. But ASEAN has become a very powerful regional body and a very respected global body. And I think especially the role that is being played by Indonesia. Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi has visited almost all of the ASEAN capitals this past week, and she has spoken to some of the major role players. The USA Embassy, for example, yesterday asked to have an interaction with us to exchange views on Myanmar. And they gave us their perspectives and we shared our perspectives and also shared some notes on what can be done together in the international community. So you have the government dimension, which I think is very important. But civil society and academia, I think academia must be mobilized. We have a powerful academia in South Africa, and I think they have been relatively quiet on this. And I think they are a powerful voice, and they must be mobilized, our think tanks and so forth. Likewise, our student movements and our civil society organizations. I think all of these sectors need to be mobilized because this will encourage the various sectors. We have seen health workers, for example, in Myanmar coming out on the streets, despite the challenges of COVID and the dangers that COVID places. But the solidarity from all sections of Myanmari society must be mirrored globally by all sectors of society, in addition to what governments can do and the multilateral global bodies like the UN. I think that is very important going forward. And I think we must work in partnership with each other and complement the activities of each other to make it a concerted and powerful action going forward that will meaningfully have an impact on the military junta in Myanmar and get them to rethink the proposal. We live in a very different age from the 2007 Ochre Revolution, where the military could go and mow down the people. Today, you cannot block out internet totally. You cannot block out social media totally. All of us are watching what is going on in Myanmar. And even those major powers that were a bit reluctant in the past are now forthcoming, as some of the other speakers have spoken out, because it impacts negatively on all of us when you have this kind of undemocratic actions that undermines global rule of law. And we're trying to create a more equitable and rules-based global order. So those of us that believe in this must have our voices heard. And I think South Africa has an important role to play on this front, not just from the side of government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anil. I think that was a good way to kind of contextualize what our role is. Ibrahim?
Yeah, I agree with what Anil Shukla has been saying. In South Africa, we have a very vibrant civil society. We have strong solidarity movements. Now we have a very strong solidarity movement with the Palestinians. We have a solidarity movement supporting the Sahrawi people in Western Sahara. Even we have a solidarity movement in support of Cuba and condemn the blockade against Cuba by the United States. We even have a little solidarity movement on the Kurdish issue. I think they're based in Cape Town. So South Africa has this culture or to bring people together and express solidarity with people who are fighting for freedom and democracy all over the world. I think South Africa should also mobilize civil society, as Anil Shukla has said, and the academia to support the struggling people of Myanmar. Just to say another word, you see, the transition that took place was not a real transition. I mean, the fact that 75% of the seats were reserved for the military, and Aung San Suu Kyi herself was somehow a prisoner of the military. We in the ITI had close contact with her. Two of my colleagues, Rolf Meyer and Ivor Jenkins, made numerous visits to Myanmar. And we also had dialogue and contact with the Rohingya Muslims and the Buddhists, and set up some type of a peace committee there to bring the Muslims and the Buddhists together, which is working very well. I don't know what's going to happen now because of the coup. I think that we can, as South Africans, share our experience among the people of Myanmar. Aung San Suu Kyi herself did say that, look, she couldn't move very much because she was always afraid of the military. Of course, there's no excuse why she didn't condemn what was happening with the Rohingya people. But she was actually a prisoner of the military. But for the way forward now, and I'm hoping that this whole demonstration will lead to a drawing up of a new inclusive constitution for Myanmar. The problem would not be solved unless you have a democratic constitution. I think the time is very favorable for the people to demand that they should do away with the old constitution, undemocratic constitution, and have a new constitutional assembly to draw up a new constitution. Thanks.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I think this ties in very well with what Don Gomedi is saying, is that what's going on in South Africa. The partnerships for democracy, justice, and peace are becoming increasingly important, but important in terms of trying to ensure that this global solidarity for the kind of reform we're seeing in the international system needs to be maintained. There needs to be sustenance and so forth. So I think it's important that we continue to look at these partnerships with our counterparts in ASEAN, and even think about different spaces that we occupy in the global governance arena within the UN. Maybe for both Anil and Ibrahim, just to think about before I'll ask other participants other questions, just to think about how do we bring this momentum into Africa as a space in terms of a solidarity as well, with regard to the kinds of momentum we are building, both from a government level in the world, but also in the context of the global civil society kind of partnerships that could be mobilized. You spoke about academia, we spoke about civil society, we spoke about even the role of media, and how does media in South Africa create a sustained kind of informed view of what's happening in the country. So I think, just to think about that for a bit, and then I'll come back to you. But there was an interesting point raised, and I think this comes to Kenneth's presentation about the dirty companies campaign. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Because from my experience in South Africa, we had that kind of sanctions against companies who were doing business with the apartheid regime. And we still have this kind of global role of business and ethics, and the role of human rights and business. And so maybe you can just expand a little bit on that. It's a question raised by Sunny Morgan.
In fact, many of the early campaigns against corporations that were willing to work with the military were campaigns that were inspired by the campaigns that were held during the apartheid era, when people realized that this was one of the way in which the ordinary consumers can participate in mobilizing social changes. Today, this campaign on Facebook among my Burmese friends, for instance, taking place at a very micro level, where people identify domestic Burmese businesses and social influencers that actually were family ties to the leaders of the coup. And so people were exposing them and saying, do you really want to be buying cosmetic from these people now that you know that what their family members are willing to do to sons and daughters who are protesting? And a lot of the overseas people may not actually realize that the products and the corporation that they love and they support have kind of like a ambiguous tie to the Burmese military. And the Burmese military is good at that because they actually don't operate in the economy openly. They operated through the Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited, the front, the corporate-like entity. So people don't realize that there are connections to, for example, Infosys or Apple, where somehow money is going into them if you're buying certain products. So people are now becoming much more aware of it. And I have a feeling that in the social media era, exposing them and making consumers aware of the fact that maybe they shouldn't be supporting these actually is very effective.
Thank you. Just to Michael, I want to ask the question. I mean, you spoke a lot about the global solidarity and how we in the globe can sustain a momentum around being informed, and the sanction campaign. What makes what makes this time around the sustainability of these kinds of campaigns going forward, Michael? I mean, how do we get that sustainability going, given the fact that, in many ways, there are other conflicts around the world as well that's happening. There are many other kinds of human rights questions being raised as well. And maybe somebody will ask, the Myanmar conflict, yes, but then what about other issues? And how do we create that sustainability with regard to the kinds of issues that you raised in your presentation?
Well, maybe we need another hour or two to answer this question. It's a great one. How are we going to move forward? I like to think in terms of a two-hand strategy. We have citizen boycotts and consumers making decisions about how they're going to spend their own money, and the civil society spending their money, and businesses spending their money. And then we have the governments, that most of us have democratic governments that we can try to influence, who can also at the governmental level engage in either incentives in terms of or penalties, sanctions that are well thought through, to try to push and support the people of Burma, in this case Myanmar, or other conflicts in the right direction. As a non-South African, I do have some thoughts that might be helpful. One of my concerns is that Burma does not become a geopolitical battleground the way we see Syria or Yemen or Libya, which are in terrible civil wars, but they can't even resolve their civil wars because there are so many outside players who are fighting over their territory. We do not want to see Myanmar become a geopolitical battleground between the United States and China, or India and China, for example. And I think South Africa has a very important role to play to engage the Chinese, engage the Russians, engage all the players and say, hey, let's not turn this into a geopolitical battleground. Let's work for sustainability, for democracy, for the rule of law, etc. And I think that there's a role to play for South Africa. I am also at Nonviolence International. We're very inspired by what Costa Rica has done to abolish its army. And we think that South Africa is not in danger of ever being invaded, and that it could set an example for the world. We need to move towards a rules-based globe, away from militaries, which in many cases, like Burma, are just mafias that kill their own civilians and live off their own societies. And if South Africa could set an example and abolish its army, it might be a great example that the Burma and the rest of the world could follow. Finally, I just say that these Zoom, and you're setting the example today, we have the capacity now to build the social networks, the civil society networks around the world, based on the interfaith religious work that we see Kyochi doing, or the labor movement is doing, or the women's movement, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender movement. I would say another movement that's very weak that needs to be made very strong is the consumer movement. We need a much stronger international consumer movement that can engage in the corporate capitalist universe and try to balance the powers that be. So it's a very exciting possibility. I'll just finish. I'm sorry, saying a lot. Just saying that I think Myanmar may not go on for a long time, at least in terms of this current crisis. The things are looking very auspicious. It could turn very, very bloody, but we could also see a dramatic return of civilian rule in Myanmar, and then hopefully move forward to resolve their long-standing issues in terms of federalism and getting along, and human rights in that country. So you asked a big question. I gave you a lot in a hurry.
Thank you very much. I think you
thank
really
you.
covered it. I'm sorry to rush you. I'm just told by the organizers that we're going to get off Facebook and YouTube very soon, so we need to wrap up. So I'm going to actually let Anil and Ibran off the hook here and say, no, you don't have to think about it right now. But I'm going to basically say, I think it's been a very, very stimulating discussion. I don't want to actually summarize or do a summation because I don't think I'll do it justice. But just to say that I want to understand that this is something that's going to be long-term, ongoing. And Michael, you're asking us to get rid of our army or military. That's going to be an important message that Anil is going to take back to government. And there's all kinds of issues there that's at play. But I think what I want to do is to say that I think this time around is the question that it's the sustainability. There's never going to be a moment where the military is not going to come back. I think the military has met a point where it's going to be extremely difficult for it to maintain the kind of rule that it wants without having that pushback and that kind of sustainability. And I think for the question of the youth, I think it's critical in the context of what's happening in the country, and there's that momentum in the diaspora. I think globally, if you see in countries moving, and I think the naming and shaming and the fact that you're actually involved in these kinds of engagements with military governments or illegitimate military governments is going to be really difficult to justify this. So you can't hide. There's no stone where you can hide under, given that you can actually expose a lot. I'm going to hand over to Ella. I think she's going to make the closing remarks and thank everybody and bring this to a close.
Thank you so much, Sanusha. not sure if Father Lapsley wants to say something before I continue. You're muted.
Just to say that it was wonderful the way Michael brought up the possibility of us not having an army. And I think as South Africans, we took a deep breath, and that's why I said yes, 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 yes. So thank you, Michael, for putting that on the table. We who have had such a history of armed conflict and have major trauma in our nation over centuries. So thank you. And I could see Sanusha having a sense of shock at that particular comment. But I also think it's going to be very important to publicize what Kenneth also said about these company connections with the military. We need that knowledge to know and how to act as well. And thank you to Ibrahim as well for saying Aung San Suu Kyi failed to speak out against what happened to the Rohingya, and that was a massive failure on her part. So thank you for, in a very quiet way, bringing out that point.
Thank you so much, Father. I just wanted to say that, we wanted this as an information sharing, session where we could inform other organizations that are watching about what is happening and what are the possibilities, what people can do. But at the same time, I think that, we need to set up a process through which we can disseminate all this to the public. So there is a lot of information that has come out of here, but we need to still, build on that information. I think all the things that Kenneth has been talking about, we need to have more information on those companies and so on so that we can apply pressure. So let's build on that. There is also the Gandhi King Global Network, where I actually met Kenneth and Michael and Mimi. And so that network is a huge network as well, international network, and we can take all this information together. So I think that this, webinar and, this mode of communication, which has come about, I am only learning it now and in the past year because of COVID. And we can say thank you to COVID for introducing us to this way of communication, which is getting us, to be able to communicate right across the globe and be able to share information. I think that information is very, very important. So I want to thank each one of you for coming, agreeing so quickly to come and speak here and share your own experiences. I want to thank all of you for, also agreeing at the last minute, like I think Father Michael was only approached yesterday, but he agreed to come. And Father Reverend Suguno also agreed to come. And it was just 1 week. Last week we were at the GKGN, and this week we've got this one. So, it was really, really through your cooperation, your agreement, coming together like this, that we were able to achieve this. I think going forward, we need to look at a couple of things. One of them is this question of consumer, boycotts or consumer strength to press those corporates that are enabling or that are giving the power to the military. That's one thing we need to do. also the countries that are selling armaments to these people. And I'm hoping seriously that South Africa is not selling any arms to the military in Burma. But I think those countries that are selling arms, we also need to identify them and do something about it to to pressurize them to stop doing it. The second thing is about the military. I think that worldwide, because today it's Burma, there's also Sudan to think about. There's also other places around the world where there are problems. And how do we approach those? And one of the things is to cut down this military expenditure. So we have been thinking about, I know that Religions for Peace started the arms down movement some time back, where they talked about not having arms, spending the money that you spend on armaments into, sustainable development goals. And if our community is happy, why do you need arms? Why do you need armies? So let's make the community satisfied and happy by transferring the money that we spend on militaries into providing sustainable development goals. So I think that those are other avenues where we can speak about, and changing armies into peacekeeping forces, rather. And not forces with armaments, but peacekeepers who can do it non-violently. So it'll be peacekeepers rather than armies that we need. So that is the third point that I want to make. And then finally, just to say that we see that so many people have been doing work, important work, in this particular issue of Myanmar. And if we can all come together and do it jointly and share each other's experiences, how much more forceful would our work be? So I want to leave everybody with that thought of coming together. Here's a platform. We can all, communicate with each other and work together. Look at ways of how we can work together on this issue and other issues. So thank you again to everyone, and particularly I want to thank Sanusha. Last but not least, thank you so much for coming and facilitating this with your knowledge, with your youthfulness and everything. This session went off well, I think. And so thank you so much for that. And lastly, I also want to thank Selvin, whom we do not see here, and Kidar, whom we do not see. They are the technical people. Selvin provided us with this platform. Gandhi Development Trust doesn't have the platform itself. So Selvin enables us to use the Zoom platform. And Kidar has been helping with the technical issues. So thank you to both of you, Selvin and Kidar. Without you, we couldn't have had this. Thanks, everybody. And finally, I think Sanusha might want to just wrap up before we say goodbye or good night.
It was a pleasure, Ella, and it was a wonderful discussion. It takes me back to my days of activism and not being an academic only. I think we really have to think of the world as a global community and not as a piece of ownership around resources. And so I think the idea of coming together again around humanity is more important than worrying about national interests and security interests around natural resources and extractive industries. And this would be, for me, the starting point of the whole boycott campaign around illicit diamond trade, illicit natural resource trade, oil, and arms, which doesn't really go to facilitating peace, but rather creating more instability and conflict. So yes, I think we all have to mobilize and find our voices, both in the media with blogs, articles, and just keeping the space and getting our media to talk about in South Africa, to talk about Myanmar in a much more strategic way, as opposed to just seeing it as another conflict in the world. And with that, I'll say thank you, good day, good night, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And I wish you to have a fantastic weekend and be safe wherever you are.